Right, okay. So my name's Nick Osborne. I'm from the School of Medicine here at the University of New South Wales, and I'm going to talk today about some cyanobacterial detection that we've been doing in Sri Lanka. Right. And so we're quite interested in a chronic kidney disease in Sri Lanka that's been found to be in excess of what we'd expect. And obviously Cylindrospermopsin would be a target for that because there has been some evidence in acute toxicity studies that affects the kidney. There's a new sort of theory around acute kidney injury that multiple acute kidney injuries may lead to this chronic kidney disease with the disappearing nephrons. But of course, there's a big sort of question mark over what about low-level, long-term exposure as well. And we know there's a range of species that do produce Cylindrospermopsin. So in Sri Lanka, drinking water sources are rapidly changing as the population is becoming urbanised. There's a rollout of piped water to communities with the Sustainable Development Goals. This high level of chronic kidney disease, which is not related to hypertension or diabetes, appears to have some sort of environmental cause. So this got us thinking that water may be a potential source of exposure. There's been around about a doubling of chronic kidney disease across the world over the last decade or so. So this is an important disease that we don't know what's going on here. Prevalence, this chronic kidney disease is up to 14% in some of these communities. It's quite devastating. There's a lack of nephrologists there and a lack of the ability to perform dialysis. And it's chewing up about 4% of the Sri Lankan health budget. So it's a real political issue there. It's also known across Mesoamerica and North Africa. So there appears to be this rise, but there's weak evidence. There's some evidence that it might be clustering, but you know, water's a good place to look, but food and air may also be in there. So we took the approach of a bottom-up approach, so we'd actually go out and get some samples of water and just see what's going on out there, but at the same time use some population-level health data to try and marry up those two particular, to see if it can start to paint a picture of what's going on. So Sri Lanka's got about 14,000 village areas. About 15% of those have no piped water, and there's a range of water that's people get their water from. Some is deep wells, protected wells, some people use rainwater, and some straight from the river. So there's a range of water sources that people use there. So our pilot, we took some water samples across about 120 locations. We were looking for cyanobacteria and associated toxins, but at the same time we're examining metals, because we know metals like cadmium are potentially related to kidney disease, and also pesticides, which are used quite liberally in this country. And so we took samples from a range of reasons, both that had high and low chronic kidney disease areas, and different sources, so from tank water, groundwater and tube cells, across a range of different areas of the country. And there'd been some work done before. This sort of light grey area seems to be the area where the chronic kidney disease is clustering in several areas around the country. And we chose some areas within that, but also some other areas. Very important in epidemiology to actually look at areas where the potential disease isn't occurring. And we also did this down in the south as well. And since we've started sampling down there, the cases of chronic kidney disease have also started occurring here. So there's sort of a theory that it might be something to do with the dry zone, which is sort of this area around here, very wet here. And the caveat there is what they call a dry zone in Sri Lanka is pretty wet, because they are in the tropics. So we had a sampling frame. We went out and chose a range of areas that you saw there across the country. Many of the samples came from deep wells, but we also looked at some piped water as well, different types of wells in different areas. And at the same time, we looked at a range of metals that we thought mainly heavy metals that might be related. Also, on a smaller subsample, we looked at a range of pesticides that we thought could be present as well. So, around the test of cyanobacteria, we took a 15 ml sample that were shipped to Australia. We looked at a range using real-time PCR and the phytoxygene kits. We looked at microcystin, cylindrospermopsin. That was sort of the one that we thought might be related to kidney disease. Some saxitoxin genes, and also total using the 16S region, just if cyanobacteria was indeed present. And we did that up at Brett Ireland's lab up at University of Newcastle. So, good news for the people of Sri Lanka. We didn't find any toxic genes in our water samples out of the 50 or so. So that was a bit of a surprise for us, because we took not only drinking water sources, we took some sources in canals and rivers, a few other, and paddy fields as well. And so we did some crude analysis about where, looking at areas that had these high amounts of chronic kidney disease, and we found no relationship at all with total cyanobacteria as well. So it's not only just the lack of toxic genes, there's no relationship to having cyanobacteria in your water. So it's actually quite normal and appears to be quite healthy to have some cyanobacteria in your water, and not to be expected if lots of people are drawing their water from water wells, for instance. Some of the highest readings came from a lake sample. That sort of made sense, and as I'd mentioned, many of the wells also have cyanobacteria in them. So we also collected a range of health data, looking at hospital records for several regions. Now, health data, even in Australia, using things like hospital records is very dangerous in epidemiological studies. We know that. It's even more complicated if you get to a lower to middle income country like Sri Lanka. But there are some surveys undergoing at the moment that do have large numbers of people, and we're interacting with the Sri Lankans there to hopefully start to paint a bit of a picture there. So to give you a bit of an idea, the census was performed in 2012, and there was a question in there: did your household have water piped to it? This is a region in Sri Lanka that was well known for having some of those 14% levels of chronic kidney disease. And we can see there's sort of starting to cluster that some areas here that had a high proportion of piped water, and that matched the population density. Makes sense. These are the big towns where water's being piped to. So there's a lot of regions outside that had lower amounts. So then what we did, we could map that over a larger region, and you can see some areas had quite high proportions. So this is about 25 to 100%. So these are the towns and cities, and then you've got these agricultural regions that have a much lower amounts of piped water. But then we went and looked at the distribution of the chronic kidney disease, and we're seeing there seemed to be this pattern that's occurring in these regions, and it appeared to be different to where piped water was. So there seemed to be this linkage between using well water and pipe water. But again, remembering we took some samples of those cyanobacteria, about 50 samples, but it was a spot sample. So maybe we just were there on the wrong day, or really, the blooms occur at different times of the year and that we're missing them. So it's sort of saying to us that we've captured some information, but we also have the understanding that it's a much broader story as well. So we're looking now using condition autoregressive modelling to look at these models to enable us to make those comparisons. And this sort of modelling relies on allowing what the surrounding areas look like, and we can potentially go ahead and do some Bayesian models to look at a range of risk factors. And some of our initial analysis here, we can see we adjusted for social economic status, and we use education. That was also measured in the census, because we thought, well, richer people are generally healthier, so it's something we can adjust for. And basically, remembering we're using this is an ecological level study, so we're using village area, not individual patients, but where they occur. And the coefficient we got, so in general, increased proportion of piped water seems to decline in kidney disease. Now, this is important in Sri Lanka because there is that rollout of piped water going ahead, so it seems like the right thing to do. So, potable waters in Sri Lanka seem to be good and sort of below WHO guidelines at the spot measure we made. There's a lot of cyanobacteria in the water, but it doesn't appear to be the toxic variety. There doesn't appear to be any relationship between cyanos and chronic kidney disease. There's this story around the well water, so is there something in the well water additionally that we're not measuring? Or is it we're just measuring at the wrong time? So this means, obviously we'd like to do some more further research there. So monitoring over longer times, and we think about the extreme events. This is some flooding that occurred last year in Sri Lanka, where about 200 people died. And so we'd like to examine more closely this well water, and we're looking at some potential eDNA approaches to look for not only cyanobacteria, but whether other disease-causing things like leptospirosis is definitely on the cards that may be linked to chronic kidney disease. And we're starting up, we're also examining India is an area we're moving into. The state of Andhra Pradesh also has this strange chronic kidney disease and also has water quality problems as well. So hopefully what we're learning in Sri Lanka we can also co-examine in India. So I'd just like to say thanks to funders and some people who have helped me out along the way. And yeah, thank you.
I always like a speaker who finishes early. So we'll have time for a couple more questions. I'll kick off. I might have missed this at the beginning, but compared to a, let's call it non-endemic area, how many fold higher is this disease prevalence?
Okay, the disease prevalence, well, it goes up to about 14%. In Australia, chronic kidney disease probably running at about 8%, but that's not this undetermined variety. So that's led by hypertension and diabetes. So in the unendemic areas or non-endemic areas, you're probably looking at about 1 to 2%. So there's quite a difference in range there.
Yes, Brad.
What did the pesticide data show?
Okay, yes, I didn't say that. No, the pesticides, there was clean water, didn't seem to be any pesticides in it, and also the metals that we also were worried about because cadmium's a known neurotoxin, nephrotoxin. Yeah, it was all clean. So on that day, the people of Sri Lanka were getting excellent water. Can't vouch for the other, three.
Cyanide?
Cyanide? No, we didn't look at cyanide.
Ballard?
Yeah, Bala from Chemistry Council. I'm glad that you are in Sri Lanka, my country of origin. A couple of things. One, you're looking at the cyanotoxins. That means non-toxins. This may not be the gene that we're chasing that was causing the issue. So I would be a bit more skeptical about expanding the results, saying that cyanobacteria was not the reason. We don't know what we don't know. The other thing I heard that it's prevalent in men. Most of the dead people were men. And that particular component was never looked at. I don't know whether it affects both parties in the same way, but men are more susceptible to death. Do you have any comment on that? Particularly, I like to go back to the cyanobacteria gene thing as well.
Yeah, look, it's controversial. The data isn't fantastic that's out there. Some studies have said it's sort of subsistence young male agricultural workers, which got us thinking about going out to paddy fields. They don't get enough water when they're working, so very long work days, 12 hours, they take 2 litres of water, and when they get thirsty, they drink out of the paddy field, okay? There's other studies that show it's about a 60-40 mix with men and women. So yes, that is part of the epidemiological study that we're trying to use those clues to track it down. Maybe the study of 80,000 people will give us a bit more information, but yes, there's data of variable quality out there.
One last question.
I've recently heard on the news that there's a general underdiagnosis of chronic kidney disease, even in countries like here in Australia. So I just have a question about the surveillance mechanisms of countries like Sri Lanka, where medical records and surveillance mechanisms may not be as well developed.
Yep. Yes, in Australia it's underdiagnosed. There's 5 stages. When you get to stage 5, you're just about dead. Stage 1, 2 and 3, you wouldn't even know you've got chronic kidney disease, okay? So unless you have the appropriate tests. The data we were gathering was from hospital patients who had turned up to a clinic feeling ill and been diagnosed with chronic kidney disease of undetermined origin. So they didn't have diabetes or hypertension. There's a diagnosis of exclusion. So it's not perfect data, it's hospital data. Working with our colleagues there that are actually gone out and sampled 80,000 people in the field, initially by protein in the urine, and then they go on to do a more formal diagnosis of glomerular filtration rates. that's going to be a much better level of evidence, and hopefully we're going to interact with them and start to tell a clearer story in the future.
Thanks, Nick. That was very interesting, that talk.
Sorry.
No.